Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Before we get to today's guest, we've got Maria Wishart, aka Wheezy Pee, back with us for a current update from Duncannon, Pennsylvania, which is a town that the Appalachian Trail runs directly through around the 1149-mile mark. So, Wheezy Pee, welcome back to the podcast.
Hi, all. How are you all doing?
Hopefully everybody is, they're probably bored to death, Wheezy Pee, staying in their
Definitely.
homes. And I mean, pretty much the whole nation, the entire world is, as we know, going through things with the coronavirus. And if you guys listened to the podcast a couple weeks ago, we had an update from Wheezy Pee. So I wanted to check back in. So Wheezy Pee, tell us what's going on in Duncannon, what's going on with the stores, popular hiking spots, things like that.
So Duncannon has gotten a lot quieter since the last time I was on. There's not even kids playing outside in the playgrounds. So there's not a lot of people walking on the streets. The restaurants are all still takeout only, except for one which has delivery, because we only have one place that delivers in town anyway. The problem that we've had is Hawk Rock. The parking lot has been extremely busy and just hundreds of people hiking it. It's a very narrow part, so it's advisable not to go down there. The parking lot is now closed. You can't get into it. They put cones up and everything. As for the other spots, I haven't really been to them, but it's advisable just try to stay off the trail or find other places to hike. Don't go to popular spots right now because it's just getting too crazy. And we've had issues down there with people throwing garbage and blasting music, and it hasn't been a good scene down there.
Not good.
And Kind of Outdoorsy is not open now. They're not going to be opening for a while.
Oh, was that the store that you mentioned before? Was that they were just going to have hikers in? That's correct. And now they've closed.
Now they're just not going to open for the season yet. The new place that was coming in the old bank building next to the Doyle is a brew pub. It's a local brewery. And now they're having drive-through teller. You can purchase beer through the drive-through teller at the bank, since it's an old bank
you know
building.
what? It's alternate means of, kind of still contributing to a small business, so to speak, and
Definitely.
driving through and getting your beer, right?
Oh,
Hey, there's no problem. That's Blaze, right?
that is Blaze.
Hey, we're going to talk about your employee Blaze here in a little bit. So
Yeah.
one of the coolest things that you said to me, because Wheezy Pee and I, if anything, have, we've been talking to each other, try to help each other through this and alter our own section hikes that were going to be happening. And you made a comment to me that basically you're considering this the off season. So what have you been doing to supplement your hiking, so to speak?
Okay, so this is kind of like, it could be considered an off season. A lot of people don't hike during the winter, so they have to find ways to keep in shape and keep active and keep connected to the hiking community when it's the quote unquote off season. So I'm a big proponent of yoga. I do a lot of yoga. I do it every day. So I've increased my yoga. from 45 minutes to just over an hour. There's a lot of poses you can do with yoga that strengthen your quads and work on balance, which is really important, especially on the rocks around here. I've been taking Blaze for a walk every day. So it's good to have a dog because you can go walking every day. Also, to kind of like get some cardio in if you can't leave the house, put on some music and dance around and just have a good time. No one's watching you because everyone else is in quarantine too. So just dance like no one's watching. And that burns a lot of calories, and it's also very cardiovascular to keep yourself in shape. If you have a favorite band, there's a lot of live concerts on YouTube. So put on the live concert and just pretend you're at the concert. I did that on Sunday. I just blasted the music and stood up the whole time and sang along and just had a good time. You got to find ways to keep yourself positive and also keep training. Throw the pack on, walk around the yard. If you have stairs, go up and down the stairs, walk around your house with your pack on. Just make dinner with your pack on, just to keep your body used to carrying the pack.
Another thing you've been doing is, I know you have moved to working from home, which a lot of people have, and you have a few new coworkers, and you've been posting about your coworkers on Facebook. So any of you out there that are interested in what Wheezy Pee and her coworkers are doing, please, I'll put your Facebook in the show notes, but talk to us a little bit about that.
So I think it's really important to stay positive right now with everything going on. So I've been trying to do this thing where, since I'm working from home, I have a dog and 4 cats. So I call them my coworkers, and then I take pictures every day of my coworkers and write up clever little stories about what my coworkers are doing and post them to Facebook or Instagram stories. And it's just a little something to keep you a little more positive. Spread some positivity.
I love it because, I mean, Blaze, your dog, he's security, right?
He is security. He's very alert to everything that goes on outside the apartment.
And he's protecting you as you're working. And
Absolutely.
tell us what your other 4 coworkers are into.
Well, Nero is a attorney, and he is working with the birds to sue the squirrels. And then Sobo is the coworker who hides out and doesn't talk to anybody. She's in another room all the time. Puds is the coworker who never lets you get anything done because he's constantly walking across the keyboard and laying down in front of the monitor. And then Yogi is the coworker who just, like, as soon as they come in at the beginning of the day, they've just had it. So she always like curls up and puts her paws over her face and just like has it for the day, like right at 8 o'clock when I'm getting on. So you can follow them on my Facebook page with daily updates.
Well, listen, I think it's great because if anything, there's been a lot of negativity out there on the social media sites. And the next thing I want to bring up and talk about is how we are going to steer away from the negativity and get to the positive side of this, because there will be a positive side of this. And you reached out to me the other day and said, hey, why don't we start posting particular things on Facebook? And somehow it turned into, we are going to start using, and for those of you that listen to Mighty Blue, you heard this on Thursday on his podcast, the hashtag HRN spread positivity. So Wheezy Pee, talk to us about that.
Well, I've seen a lot of negativity online, pretty shocking for me coming from the hiking community. And I was like, this has to stop. We're hikers. We are usually bonded together. We all have kind of common goals. So we need to remember that during this difficult time. I know a lot of people are going through a lot of stuff, but we have each other still. This too shall pass. We will be out on the trails eventually. So I've been working through, kind of getting rid of negativity on my Facebook. And I talked to you about doing something about posting photos and spreading positive messages, messages of hope, of positivity, of the future, great pictures maybe you took on your hiking adventures in the past. And let's just bond together during this time and be positive towards each other and like each other's photos and say, hey, I've been there and that's a great picture. And just let's all come together and use that hashtag HRN spread positivity to all come together during this difficult time.
And I really appreciate you reaching out to me and even talking about that. And one of the things we talked about with Mighty Blue, and I know Wheezy Pee, you were doing this as well, we are communicating with other hikers, reaching out in personal messaging and instant messaging and talking to other hikers about things. Cause it's almost like, we're grieving the trail. And the number one thing we need to do is reach out to each other and talk through that grief, so to speak, and then, change that to positivity. So really, really appreciate that. And before I let you go, on the last episode, when you popped in a couple weeks ago, we talked about your husband, Jake, and I want to know how he's doing because he is still driving, I believe, and getting supplies out there. So fill us in on what's happening with your husband, Jake.
He's still driving, still putting in a lot of hours. The truck drivers are out there, the warehouse workers working hard to get everything out to everybody. They're doing their best. They're getting as many loads as they can to where they need to go. So keep them in your prayers and your thoughts. And they're out there on the front lines for everybody. Also, with the healthcare workers too. So keep them all in your thoughts and prayers.
We will definitely do that. And from my heart and the listener's heart, please tell him thank you for everything he's doing because all of a sudden, truck drivers and essential employees, healthcare workers, everybody that's on the front line, whether you work at a grocery store, whether you're driving a truck, whether you're in the healthcare industry, and many, many more people that are out there have become very vital to all of us. So again, tell him thank you for that. And Wheezy Pee, thank you for coming back on and sharing with us what's happening in Duncannon, Pennsylvania, and some of your, what we're going to call off-season tips. And thank you, everybody. And now on to our guest. Welcome back to Jester Section Hiker, the premier podcast with the spotlight on section hikers. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where you will hear stories about everyday people who, in addition to their everyday lives, make the commitment to hike long-distance trails where every section is a new beginning. Before I introduce you to today's guest, I want to give you some information on the National Scenic Trail that we are going to be focusing on for today's episode. The North Country Trail was commissioned by Congress as a National Scenic Trail in 1980 and is the longest National Scenic Trail in the National Trails system, stretching over 4,600 miles over 8 states from North Dakota to Vermont. The trail traverses through a national grassland, 10 national forests, more than 150 federal, state, and local public lands, near 3 of the Great Lakes, past countless farmlands, through large cityscapes, over many rivers, and through the famed Adirondacks. When a person completes the North Country Trail, they are recognized as an end-to-ender. As of today, there are 18 end-to-enders that have hiked the entire North Country Trail and 2 end-to-trippers that have completed the trail, but some of it by bike. A total of only 20 people. Our guest today is the first woman to hike the entire length of the North Country Trail by section hiking. In addition to the North Country Trail, she has also completed the entire Buckeye Trail and the Finger Lakes Trail. She has written 2 books about her section hiking adventures on the North Country Trail. She has a daily blog, a website where you can find all the books she has authored, is very active on Facebook, and loves speaking and giving presentations about her favorite National Scenic Trail. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, she has also ridden her bike from the Pacific to the Atlantic Ocean. Please welcome with me to the podcast, Joan Young.
Hi, Julie. Jester.
Joan, you're supposed to cheer and stuff.
Oh, okay. Yay.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for being willing to come on the podcast and share with us who you are and what you've done for the North Country Trail hiking community. So let's go ahead and get this kick started off by telling the listeners how you stumbled upon the North Country Trail and what fueled you to start hiking the NCT.
Well, thank you for having me. I always love to talk about the North Country Trail. I grew up in Western New York, and when I was a kid, the only long distance trail anybody had ever heard of was the Appalachian Trail. And so, although it goes through New York, but nowhere near where I was, but I had heard of it. So I had always wanted to hike that trail. But then life took me to the Midwest and family, and I didn't get a single hiker, all that kind of stuff. So I
Oh
was,
no.
yeah, I know, 3 boys and a husband and no hikers. Um, the youngest was almost done with high school, and I was driving to Cadillac, Michigan, which is about an hour away from where I live, but it wasn't a city that I often traveled to. So I'm driving down the highway, and there's a brown sign that says North Country National Scenic Trail. And there's a kiosk, and I went, "What?" I was on a time schedule. I went to Cadillac, but when I came back, I stopped and I got an address off the kiosk and I wrote for information. And I went, "Wow, there's a National Scenic Trail right here where I live." It turned out that that particular trailhead is about 40 miles from my house, but the trail, the closest it comes to my house is 13 miles. But that was the day that I found the trail. That was 1988, and I didn't get to hike even a piece of it until a little bit later, but that's when I discovered it.
Very cool. I don't know what I would have done if I'd have seen a sign of a national scenic trail, 40 miles from the house or the closest spot, 13. I would have freaked out like you. So I would have been like, "Oh my God, where have I been and what's happening?"
I had no idea, and, in 1988, a lot of people hadn't even heard of national scenic trails, myself included, really. I didn't know really what that meant, but I knew it had to be significant, National Scenic Trail.
So, Joan, let's just go ahead and get this part out of the way. You've hiked 4,600 miles and probably then some of the North Country Trail, and you don't have a trail name. And you said, you know what? That's just fine with you. So, with that being said, tell us why that's just fine with you and what type of hiker you are.
Other than an obsessive hiker, probably the best word to describe me would be a loner. I don't like big groups. That's actually one of the primary reasons that I lost my interest in hiking the Appalachian Trail is because it's so heavily traveled. And I do like, we'll get to that very soon, I know, but I do like hiking with maybe one or two other people. But I really like that quiet solo experience. So that's the kind of hiker I am. And that's why I don't have a trail name, and that's all good.
That's all good, and it doesn't matter. So, let me ask you this, did you know that you would like to be alone on the trail and hike alone, even back when you thought you might do the AT and before you found the North Country Trail? Did you always know that, "Hey, I kinda wanna go solo or maybe with only 1 or 2 people on this?"
Well, it certainly wasn't as well defined as it is now, but I have always been a loner. And I guess I would have to say that even though I might not have described myself quite as clearly at that time, that's just the kind of person I was.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think we can get too much into your hike of the North Country Trail without actually talking about your hiking partner Marie.
Correct.
So talk to us about Marie. I don't want to mispronounce her last name, so I'll let you pronounce her last name. So talk to us about Marie and
Alton.
how long. Yeah, Altina. Okay, how long you two have actually been hiking together?
All right. Well, we met the summer that we were 12 years old. We've been friends longer than you've been alive.
Okay.
Uh, we met at Girl Scout camp. We met at Girl Scout camp, and we became best friends immediately. We lived 60 miles apart. I was in the northernmost town in the council, and she was in the southernmost town. And trust me, in 1960, that might as well have been practically the other side of the moon. But we managed to get together about once a year, other than at scout camp through high school. Actually, our senior year, we saw each other more often because we were both on what was called the Senior Scout Planning Council. So that was cool. But we have just stayed in touch, and that friendship, you know, that sometimes there's one person in your life that everything you seem to grow at the same places at similar times, and everything just continues to click. And she's a lifetime friend of the kind that some people probably never find, and I'm very grateful to have her. So yes, we've been doing outdoor things together for a lot of years.
So what did you do? Did you call her up and say, "Listen, Marie, we have a national scenic trail like right in our, in my backyard. Let's go." Is that how that went down, or?
Pretty much. Um, she had been coming out here to visit us almost every summer for a few years. I found the trail in 1988. I didn't get to try hiking on it until 1991 when I just took a little 20-mile hike by myself. The day that I discovered the trail, I took a little hike and I thought I was on it and discovered later that I wasn't. The blazes, I didn't understand what blazes were. I ended up on a dirt road, a fire road, actually, not even a public highway. So realized later I hadn't even been on the trail. And then my mother her health was failing, and I was traveling to New York a couple times a year to deal with that. So in 1991, Marie had met me at my mom's house to help do some, I think we were actually packing things up at that point. And the trail, this trail is just everywhere if you're in the Northeast, okay? The trail is about 25 miles from my mother's house. And so we said, well, we're tired of working. Let's just go do a little hike. So we went and found this trail and we did about 2 miles on it. And then the next summer, you're absolutely right. I called her up and I said, "You want to do a little hike? You want to see if we can put together enough gear that we could possibly do a backpacking trip for 3 days. Let's see if we can do 3 days and see if we like it," because we'd both been raising kids and hadn't done anything in terms of a multi-day hike since we were in
Right.
school.
You just been going through life. I mean, pretty
Right,
much.
right.
So, and tell us your style when you're hiking together. I know you mentioned to me, you said you like to do one thing, and Marie just basically, she just says, "Okay, Joan." So tell us about your two. I mean, I would say you're almost opposite in how you get ready and prepare and everything.
We're complementary, okay? We both like the hiking. I love doing the planning, and she doesn't. I'm the one that's driven by, I want to do this trail. I want to go see that thing. Marie's just like, "Oh, okay, that sounds like fun. I don't want to plan it." I go, "But it's all planned. I did it. Come on." So, so it all works out great. She came out here and we hiked for 3 days on a piece of the trail that actually isn't even a piece of the trail anymore.
Wow.
Well, it was a piece that was at that time on concurrent with the shore to shore horseback trail, which is pretty unpleasant hiking for foot travel. It's sandy soil out here and it's used so heavily that it was pretty nasty walking. It was like a ditch that the horse's hooves had created. But we were out there for 3 days and we had extremely mismatched and goofy collection of equipment because she had gotten a few pieces of her son's gear that he'd had in scouts. I had just bought a brand new backpack. Actually, I had the backpack that I packed in with for the entire 20 years hiking the North Country Trail. So we were just testing the waters with anything that we had. So we were out there for 3 days and we finished. We came out of the woods. It was really funny. We came out of the woods to the edge of a road and a guy in a pickup truck pulled up. He had his two little girls with him. He wanted to know what we were doing. And we told him, we said, we've just hiked for 3 days and we're just finishing. And he went, "Well, that's crazy. Why are you doing that? What, do you like that?" And we kind of looked at each other and said, "Yeah, we do." I think it was part of that same conversation, or maybe just after the guy in the pickup truck left. we looked at each other and said, "Well, you want to do this again?" And we went, "Yeah."
Yes, you do, of course. So over the years, I mean, basically you and Marie, I mean, hundreds of miles hiking together.
Yes.
And you told me you guys started to plan your trips around the yearly North Country Trail, like trail conference.
Right.
So, yeah, talk to us about why that was important to your plan and why you guys decided to do that. Obviously, you wanted to go to the conference, but did it make sense to do that? Talk to us a little bit about that.
Right. Well, the first 3 years that we did hikes, long hikes, we were just picking something out of the air and going to do it. I hadn't yet decided that I wanted to hike the whole thing. I was just sampling it, you know? And so we did the eastern, what was at that time, the eastern end, New York, and we went out to North Dakota and did the western end, which was a completely new experience for me. I'd driven through North Dakota, but I'd never really done anything on the prairies. And we also did the Chippewa National Forest in Minnesota, but I hadn't as yet set this goal of hiking the whole trail. So we were just picking things. But then once I decided that I really wanted to do the whole trail, I mean, not only is this the trail 4,600 miles of walking, but you have to drive to all these places, right?
Right.
Often with two cars, so that you can put one at each end. We did manage to pull off a couple of hikes with only one car, but you've got to have an alternate way to spot the other end of the hike. So in the meantime, I had decided that I wanted to get involved with this trail as something more than a hiker, but in a volunteer capacity as well, and had started going to these annual conferences which rotate through the states. So here I was driving, halfway across the country some years, and it just seemed not seemed it was totally sensible to at least plan our long hike to be in the same state or near where we were traveling for the conference anyway. So I think with maybe only one or two exceptions, we did that from then on.
That is amazing, and that is really cool that I mean, at the very beginning, you decided you wanted to be, more than just a hiker on the trail. You wanted to be involved in the associations and the communities.
That was in 1995. That was the first conference that I went to, and it was an amazing conference. I mean, there are always great speakers, but they had an exceptional selection that year. They had Bill Irwin, who was the first blind man to hike the Appalachian Trail. They had Steve Newman, who wrote World Walker. He was the first man to walk around the world.
Wow.
And they had just rolled out the first iteration of end-to-end patches, and I'm a patch freak. And Ed Talone and Chet Fromm, who had both recently finished hiking the entire trail, were there. And it was I just couldn't help myself.
You were definitely hooked by then, right?
Yes.
Yes, yes. I've actually I saw a video about Bill Irwin
Ugh,
and he hiked with his dog, correct?
yep, Orient. And Orient was there. He was retired at the
Oh,
time.
wow.
So he was not serving as Bill's guide dog, but he came with him occasionally to events. And so I got to meet not only Bill but Orient.
That is amazing.
It
That is
really is.
wow.
Yeah.
So a few minutes ago you mentioned walking on the western end of the trail in the prairies. And you have a story that the year you hiked in the prairies, somehow you ended up in a ditch and talking to a reporter. So talk to us about that. First of all, how amazing the prairies are, and then
Well,
talk to us how you ended up with a reporter in a ditch.
okay. We had no idea. We really thought we were headed towards some kind of northern desert. We had no clue. Turns out it's the prairie pothole region. That was a wet year, so there was water everywhere. I didn't have any of my waterfowl books with me or prairie plants or any of that kind of stuff. The only real big sky country that I had encountered before that was in Montana, which of course is the big sky state. But I hadn't had any experience camping out in a place where you can just see the sky from one horizon to the other. I'm a botany nut, probably second only to hiking. So the plants were all new. The sky was amazing. The clouds were amazing. The sunsets were amazing. It was it was phenomenal.
I feel like I'm there. Like I really want to see those big skies and things like that.
Yep.
So,
And I thought that it was going to be dead flat. It's certainly not mountains, but it's like rolling hills. We could just picture those seas of grasses with the covered wagons driving through them.
wow. I mean, I could actually see that right now. I mean, you've actually got me stopped talking, which is a miracle. So, so how did you guys end up in this ditch with a reporter?
Okay, well, I'm not sure quite. It was a big, wide swale of a ditch. It's not like we were, sitting in the water in some little channel, but
Oh, come on, Joan. You can make it whatever you want, really.
well, I could, but I try not to lie. What was really stupid was that, well, you really couldn't escape the ticks no matter where you were, but it was kind of stupid that we were sitting in the grass, but there we were. There weren't really any other choices. You know, I'm not sure why we were in this ditch, except that there wasn't really anywhere else to sit. We were just alongside the road, and this reporter had pulled up beside us and wanted to interview us for the Riverdale paper, which is the westernmost community on the trail, which was actually, it's a whole story in itself. It was a constructed community that was built when they constructed Garrison Dam, which is the dam that creates Lake Kakawea, which is the western terminus of the trail. But there still are people who live there. So this lady wanted to interview us for the newspaper. And while she was talking with us, and there were four of us on that hike, Marie and her son, David, and another friend of mine, Matilda. And of course, when it comes up to the questions about, well, who plans this and who puts it together and stuff, they all point at me. And the reporter said, well, well,
Yeah, they're like, Joan just tells us when to show up, okay?
yep, yep. She said, well, what is your goal? What is your plan about this trail? And it just popped out of my mouth. I want to do the whole thing.
So what was Marie's reaction when or was she like, oh, that's
Oh,
Joan, or?
yeah, she probably wasn't surprised at all. She's been dealing with my obsessive lifestyle for quite a while.
And like you said, you guys have a complementary relationship, so that's amazing. So as you move forward, you and Marie, you're continuing to hike, and somewhere along that way, you decided that you wanted to start writing a book, maybe of the funny stories and things that happened on the trail. So talk to us about what solidified that decision for your first book.
Okay. Those early longer hikes, there were the four of us in North Dakota. In the Adirondacks, Matilda and I went. In the Allegheny National Forest of Pennsylvania, it was Marie, David, and myself. And then the Chippewa National Forest in Minnesota was, again, Marie, David, and myself. I thought that it would be neat to write up some essay type accounts of the hike and print them out, and give them to the people who had gone on the hike so that we would all remember the fun and the not so fun and all the other stuff that happened. So I did that, and I showed them. I was in grad school at the time. I showed them to a lady that I had made friends with there, who was not a student, but was in another group that I belonged to. And she went, "Oh my gosh, Joan, this has to be a book." And I thought, that's kind of cool. I've always been a writer as well. I thought, well, she's my friend. What whatever. So meanwhile, I also showed them those chapters to the man who was at that time the editor of the North Star, which is the North Country Trail Association magazine. And he was our volunteer editor, but he was retired from a career as editor of the Grand Rapids, Michigan Press newspaper. And he said, "Oh, Joan, this has to be a book." I went, okay, maybe there's something to this. So I started just without a goal of, when I would finish it. Well, I was thinking, it wouldn't be finished till I finished the trail, right? I started writing chapters and just kind of working on them. Some of those chapters were just published as standalone stories in the North Star. Well, then we're coming up on 2005, which was the 25th anniversary of the North Country Trail Association. And I had about 200, what turned out to be 200 pages, or about half of the first book done. And they said, well, oh, and by that time I had decided that it was going to have to be 2 books because nobody was going to buy an 800-page book about a hike.
Oh, God. I don't know, Joan. The hiking community, I don't know. I think they will.
Well, they've got 800 pages now, but anyway, so the association said, can you have this book done for our 25th anniversary celebration, which was at that point a year away? And I went, well, I don't know, but I'll try. And I did pull that off. So the first volume came out in 2005. That is North Country Cache, and that covers approximately half of the hike. And it's chronological, not geographical, which actually made for a better book because it's a sampler of all the states. Then since that time, I just finished North Country Quest, which is the second half of the hike. And indeed, there are 800 pages written about this trail.
It's amazing. And I've gotten a copy of the book, North Country Cache. And one of the things that I really love about, what you've written is in your first book, you wrote how this is the question, you intertwine everyday life with trying to find blue blazes in Defiance, Ohio.
Oh, yeah.
So often hikers use the terms trail life and real life. And when I was reading this, I would say that your everyday life is intertwined with hiking. Expand on that for us and when you wrote that section of the book.
Well, I am most real when I'm on the trail. So I would have to say that my real life is the walking life. That, of course, is not my everyday life. But if I could afford to, I would probably just disappear into the woods for the rest of my life.
I don't know, Joan. You would miss like going to your conferences and speaking and writing books, wouldn't you, or no?
Well, now that I've finished North Country Quest, completing the story of my hike on the North Country Trail, if push came to shove and I had the money, I probably would just take off.
And somehow I understand that, Joan. I totally understand
There are
that.
so many trails, and I'm not ancient, but I am down to the point where it's absolutely obvious that they're not all the trails I want to do are not going to fit in the rest of this life.
So I've got a question for you. At the end of your first book, The North Country Cache, you wrote, "The stories of people, historic and current, are what will make or break this trail. We do not have the continent's highest peak or the oldest structure. We do not have geographic focus or one cultural theme. What we do have are connections with America's past and future." That is so powerful when I read that. Expand on that for us.
Well, okay. Here's where that springboarded from, particularly in the earlier days of my hike. Nobody had heard of the North Country Trail, and B, if they had heard of it, they strongly discounted it as not an interesting trail, not a worthy trail. not even a trail of its own because it was concurrent with some other trails. It was just degraded so heavily. It just was nuts. So part of the problem was the trail did not have an identity of its own. The Appalachian Trail hardly needs an identity, but of course it follows that Appalachian Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
Pacific Crest and Continental Divide Trail follow ridges. The Ice Age Trail in Wisconsin follows the extent of the Wisconsin glaciation. The Florida Trail is all in Florida. Almost all of these other long trails have some identity that's obvious, often geographic, okay? The North Country Trail just is sort of looped across the northeastern continent. The question is, why? What has this trail got? Well, the answer is this trail has everything. This trail has diversity. This trail has history. It has culture. It has all kinds of scenic sites. That is one of the reasons that it wanders quite a bit, is there has been a concentrated effort to connect scenic locations throughout the northeastern United States. So the people who are looking for a hike that takes them from one amazing scenic lookout to the next day after day are going to continue to discount this trail. But what this trail does have is history forever. You can hardly walk 5 miles without finding some new little piece of something really interesting if you just have a chance to dig into the stories. There's railroad history and canal history and Revolutionary War history and French and Indian War history and Great Lakes history and the history of, like we mentioned, the settlers on the Great Plains. There's glacial history. There's early Paleozoic seas, and it just never quits. I'm going to hopefully spend the rest of my life trying to dig out these nuggets of wonderful information, mining history, all along this trail. And so it's a trail. There are still going to be the people who just want to do it in a year, and they're going to pound out 35 miles a day, and they don't care if they ever see any of that stuff. But I think this is a trail for the people who really want to explore deeper into that cultural and environmental history along the route.
And I'm going to do what I can to promote the, North Country Trail as much as
Awesome.
possible, because I mean, quite honestly, just through the North Country Trail community and this podcast, I mean, you guys have opened me with, and this podcast with open arms. It's amazing. So I thank you for that. And it's a community that you guys are very bonded. You guys are very bonded.
That annual conference really has a lot to do with that. There are a core of probably, there's lots more volunteers than this, but there's probably a core of 100 people that go to almost every one of those conferences, no matter whether they're in North Dakota or New York or somewhere in between. And those of us who do that every year are a pretty close community.
And even so close where I found on YouTube at one of these, I don't know if it was your annual conference, you guys actually have a song.
We do.
Yeah. I mean, it teared me up a little bit. I was like, I want a song when I go to
that song. There is one of those people that goes to every conference is a lady named Florence Hedin from Minnesota. And the year that the conference was in Bemidji, she commissioned Charlie McGuire, who is the official Minnesota minstrel bard, I'm not sure, to write a song for us. And of course, now it's a problem because now we have 8 states and the song has 7 states in it. But it's a neat song. He really did a wonderful job of writing us a very singable tune that gets a lot of the information in there
It does, and there you were right up in the front, like, right at the podium behind the guy. I was like, "There's Joan."
Oh my gosh,
So
was it there was a video of us singing it? Yeah, well, there's,
yes.
like 5 of us that actually know all the words to all the verses, so we get drug up to the front every year to sing it or to
I
lead it.
thought that was absolutely amazing. So, all right, let's get to 2010, and I
Okay,
cannot wait to hear your answer on this.
okay.
So, you completed the entire trail end to end by hiking in 2010, and you became the first woman to do so.
Yep.
What does that feel like, Joan?
Well, um, I didn't think that it was going to be that important to me, and it was. Um, I've always been highly competitive, but I thought I had managed to tamp that down a little bit as an adult, but probably not.
I don't know, Joan. You walked 4,600 miles section hiking the North Country Trail. I would say maybe
Well, I was of course, I was sad that it was over. I mean, I cry at the end of practically every hike just because it's over. But it wasn't as much of a letdown as I thought it might be just because I'm so involved in the community. And there are huge stretches of the trail that have been either rerouted or taken off road since I hiked them. And some of the people who helped build those sections are still, oh, Dawn, you have to come redo that because it's all different now. So some of those places I've gotten to see again, and I'm still just really involved with the trail. I can, of course, I'm still going to the conferences, and there are always hikes associated with the conferences that Marie and I try to participate in. A lot of them, I mean, there's so many hikes you can't do all of them because some of them overlap. But
So who was with you when you finished?
well, I sent out personal invitations to everyone who had hiked a significant hike with me. I mean, a few of my hikes were like group hikes that were there were 25 people or whatever that were short, and I didn't even know who all those people were sometimes. But I'm the loner, right?
Well, I wasn't gonna say anything, and then you were like, you were hiking
Yeah.
with 25 people. I got confused.
Well, short short hikes. Uh, Let me think. 5 of those, I think. 5 of those people were able to come, and in addition to that, about 25 or 30 other people came who were hiking friends or that everyday life group of people friends, and a few people who actually didn't even know me, but they just heard that it was happening and that I was finishing, and so they came. It was hosted at the home of some very dear friends of mine who are friends across both of those worlds, hiking and otherwise, because the trail actually they worked with a nature conservancy to get 2 miles of trail off road onto their property. So that's where I chose to end my hike, and it's also right on their property on this new piece of trail is a viewing platform, which is if you are hiking from the east, that is the first place on the trail that you can get a glimpse of a Great Lake. You can see Lake Michigan from that overlook.
Oh, wow, how perfect.
I know it just had to be there. So that was where I finished, and we stood on the platform and we sang the Happy Wanderer and of course cried and then went down and had a picnic.
That is amazing. I just Joan, you have an amazing story. You've got not one, but 2 books. So it's the North Country Cache, and I think you mentioned it's the North Country Quest, and
Right.
that just got released. Is that available for purchase now?
It is at the printer. They have promised me that I can pick them up this week, which better be true because I've advertised that they're going to be for sale a week from today, next Saturday, February 29th. I'm not sure when this is going to be aired. So yeah, they're going to be available February 29th.
And hopefully this will be aired and all that will be done and the listeners will be able to go on. And I will make sure in the show notes, I've got links to your website, your blog and all that good stuff and how to get your first book, how to get your second book. And now I want to kind of move on to, we reached out to the North Country Trail community for some questions, what the community wanted to hear from Joan. So I've got about 5 questions. You ready?
Sure, I can't imagine that they haven't heard these answers yet, but whatever.
All right, so, and these will be, I don't know, as long or as short as you want them. So, what are your favorite sections of the North Country Trail?
Okay, I probably get asked that question more than any other, and we've touched on my answer. The thing I love the most about this trail is the diversity of experiences. Of course, I love pictured rocks in the Upper Peninsula, but I don't want 4,600 miles of dancing on the edge of a rock by a Great Lake. The prairies were amazing. I don't want 4,600 miles of prairies. I grew up in the forested region of the Finger Lakes in New York, so I call myself a child of the eastern forests. I love the woods. Do I want to hike 4,600 miles continually in the woods? No. I love the whole canals and farms and railroads and Native American history and all of that in Ohio. If we had 4,600 miles of that, could we call it a scenic trail? Maybe not. What I love is the diversity of experiences that one finds along this trail.
Perfect. So, question number 2, what advice would you give people who are interested in section hiking the North Country Trail?
Okay. If you want to section hike the trail, you actually have it a little bit easier than someone who wants to do an end-to-end, a continuous end-to-end, because this trail is so long that unless you do an astonishing number of miles a day, which, some strong young things do, even if you're strong and young, you're not going to do this trail in 3 seasons. You can maybe do it in 10 months, okay, without just beating your body into the ground. That's averaging over 25 miles a day.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you're going to do it in section hikes, you've got it made because you can choose the times of year that are going to be the best, or at least pretty good ones to do each of the locations, each of the sections. For example, if you're going to do Upper Minnesota, the conventional wisdom, which is pretty darn good, is that you want to hike it after the ice is out and before the mosquitoes hatch.
Okay.
Catching that window can be a little tough, or otherwise go for September, October. But if you wait too late, you're going to be just Minnesota, North Dakota, Minnesota, and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan can just be brutal in the winter. And if you get too close, several people have tried to do a continuous hike of the trail by starting in North Dakota in March, and they get in a world of trouble in the snow and the cold. So if you're going to section hike it, you can choose a better time of the year to do that. You can do Southern Ohio, say in early spring. In fact, Ed Talone, who was one of our earliest hikers, did just that. He sort of defined the North Country Trail flip-flop. He did Ohio first and then went east and hiked to Ohio, took a bus across Ohio, picked up where he left off, and went on west from there.
Very nice. Okay, question number 3. Is there any unique gear for hiking the North Country Trail?
Well, it's going to be pretty tough to not have some really bad flying vermin encounters.
Oh.
Yeah, definitely a head net. Some hikers have gone with those full body net suits.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I personally, I'd rather get bitten than deal with those. But
I can't imagine going in a full bodysuit in the summer. You'd be burning up.
Oh my gosh, you can't you c- how can a piece of mesh be hot? But they are wearing a head net is just incredibly hot. And I've never tried a whole body suit, but I know a couple people who hike in those in the summer. And you have to do something about the bugs, whether you are in favor of DEET or permethrin or nets or whatever. Bugs don't bother me much, but there have been a few hikes they were just brutal.
Oh,
So
okay.
you need to be thinking about that. Let's see, we're on gear. Well, this is kind of a cross answer to this. What's unique about section hiking and gear? There are still quite a few places, long stretches of the North Country Trail where you really can't camp legally along the trail. So, particularly if you're going to section hike, this is not a problem because you can base camp somewhere near the trail and go out and do those sections in day hikes. The association is working constantly to improve that situation, but it's a huge trail, and there's just a bunch of challenges where there's not or public land that is open to camping, for the foreseeable future.
Right.
So it's good to have both backpacking and base camping gear options.
I like that as a section hiker. I like to be able to base camp. So that's really appealing. All right, Joan, number 4. What are the trails that run concurrent with the North Country Trail?
Okay. There's dozens of small ones, but the big ones are, well, actually, now that Vermont is official, the big ones are 30 miles of the Long Trail in Vermont, about 300 miles of the Finger Lakes Trail in New York, 800 miles of the Buckeye Trail in Ohio, and then in Minnesota, we pick up 3 trails in what's called the Minnesota Arrowhead, which is the Superior Hiking Trail right up the North Shore of Lake Superior, and then the Border Route and Kekakabic trails, which take you west across the top of the Arrowhead. Those are all probably forever going to be official concurrent routes. At the current time, to get down the backside of that Minnesota Arrowhead, a viable opportunity is to follow the Mesabi Trail, which doesn't cover quite the whole distance, but an awful lot of it, which is a paved multi-use trail. And ideally, eventually, we'll be off of that. There's, I think it's like 70 miles of trail in Western Ohio that we're on the Little Miami Rail Trail as well. So
Hmm.
again, those aren't what we would ideally like on a national scenic trail, but in places where it's difficult to put through an off-road route for right now, they are, good alternatives to a road walk.
So I'm glad you pronounced this because question number 5 in our last question from the North Country Trail community, you called it the Keka. Okay, I can't even say it, Joan. It's the
Kekakabic.
Kekakabic Trail in
Just call it the
Minnesota.
Kek. Everybody calls it the Kek.
Okay, the Kek. This listener compared it to the remoteness of the 100-mile wilderness on the Appalachian Trail. So just talk to us a little bit about the Kek.
Well, I haven't done the 100-mile wilderness. I've read, a bunch of AT hiker books, but the Border Route Trail and the Kekakabic Trail are pretty remote. They pass through the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. They are old trails that have not until recently, when the North Country Trail has become more popular. It's been really hard to keep those maintained. This is in an area of Minnesota where there are very few year-round residents, and so to come work on these trails are often driving 200 miles each way. So there's usually a spring and a fall trail clearing trip. I first went to that area to check it out because everybody said, "Oh, it's so remote and it's so dangerous. You just have to be super prepared." And I was like, Well, I think I'm pretty competent. Maybe they don't know I'm that competent, or maybe it's really awful, I don't know. So I went for an American Hiking Society volunteer vacation, where we canoed in and did trail work for a week and then canoed out. What I learned from that is you don't want to fool around. You darn well better know what you're doing up there, but it's not like you're going on to the Antarctic with Shackleton. Uh, if you have good backcountry skills and plan well, no, you just stumbled into my big mantra. Most accidents that happen on the trail aren't, as in they aren't accidents. They come from poor planning. So be prepared. And the same is true in the Adirondacks, where we finally have a corridor and we're beginning to build actual trail. But these are the northern section of the Arrowhead, and the Adirondacks are probably forever going to be the most remote sections on the North Country Trail. I think the problems come from the expectations people have that the North Country Trail is just some pathway through the park that's no big deal to go hike. We had one guy, a young guy, start from the eastern end a number of years ago, and he just thought it was going to be no big deal at all. And he ended up going home with hip trouble in a month. I mean, it has its own challenges.
Well, hopefully, with this interview and this podcast, we have dispelled that myth that you're just going to go out and hike 35 miles a day on the North Country Trail. And I like what you said. Be prepared, do your research. There's a lot of there's the Facebook community page. There's the association website, which is a phenomenal website. I mean, it breaks everything down by state. It gives you a lot of information about the concurrent trails. There's a lot of information out there about the North Country Trail. So that in and of itself is, just do your research.
There are 31 chapters of the Trail Association along the trail that are composed of volunteers who have signed on to build, promote, and protect this trail. And they are, without exception, eager to help hikers.
And Joan, you're also the chair of the Long Distance Hiker Recognition Committee for the North Country Trail. So talk to us a little bit about what this committee is and the end-to-end policy.
Okay. Well, after I finished my hike and I got that coveted patch, which didn't even it had been made before the Minnesota Arrowhead was even added, so it wasn't even an accurate patch anymore. But I got it. I decided that there should be some sort of recognition. I was hiker number 9 in the overall scheme of things, first woman, but the 9th hiker to complete the trail. I approached the association about what could we do, and they decided at the time that it would make sense to make it a committee of the board as opposed to the Appalachian Long Distance Hikers Association as a separate nonprofit organization, which in my wildest dreams, I would hope that someday we might reach that point, but we're not there yet. So we created a set of patches that recognize there's a central patch that anyone who meets the minimum requirements gets that, and then a series of rockers around that. So to meet a minimum requirement, you have to hike either one entire state or more, or 1,000 miles or more. So the quickest way you can get this, a beginning set of these patches, is to hike either, well, at this point, Vermont, which is only 60 miles, or it had been Pennsylvania or
all right,
Wisconsin.
calling all people in Vermont, get the patch. It's 30 miles. Come on.
60.
Or 60, I'm sorry. Well, still, I mean, yeah.
I know.
Hike
It's
to
like
60 miles.
A weekend, right? A long weekend.
Yeah.
Well, sure, a long weekend, 3 days, 20 miles a day. That's doable.
Yeah, there you go.
Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are each about 250 miles apiece. So you could conceivably do one of those short states and apply and get the central patch and the first rocker. So you can keep adding to this until you have the rockers for all the states. And at that point, then you get an extra rocker, which goes on the outside, which says either end to end hike or end to end trip.
That is perfect. And when you give me a picture for the show notes, I need a picture of
Oh,
something with,
sure.
I know you got all those patches on something.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Well, we actually are just in the process of getting uh, the rocker made for Vermont, and we're also adding one for the Mackinac Bridge, which is an official part of the trail, but you can only hike it on Labor Day. And so currently that isn't a requirement, but the people who have done that walk can apply to get the Mackinac Bridge patch. I do want to say something about the policy. Can I?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Well, one reason that, I mean, policy sounds really official, and in a sense, we wanted to do something official because we were beginning to have some problems with the fact that this trail has been so fluid, and there are huge pieces that are still on road and some big pieces that have been moved off road. And we had some people who were skipping sections that had been moved off road just because they said, oh, well, I don't have time to do that. I want to get from point A to point B, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, I realized with something of a sense of horror that if people were simply doing that, somebody could hike from Crown Point, New York to Lake Sakakawea by any method they wanted and tell us they'd hike the North Country Trail. And so I said, we need to at least say that we expect people to follow the trail.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So we're not policing this. We're not, it's an honor system thing. But we did put a statement out there that says we expect people to hike the trail. And now that the Arrowhead and Vermont are official, we are saying that we expect people to hike those. For years and years and years, there wasn't even a corridor through the Adirondacks. The Adirondack Park Authority wouldn't talk to us. But that has changed, and we now have a corridor. So we are saying that we expect people to go through this corridor. That's one of the things I would like to do because the corridor didn't exist when I did the Adirondacks. So I've only seen a little bit of where our trail is really going to be in the Adirondacks. So it's still honor system. At the end, they sign their name and say, I hiked it, and we're not going to, get on the telephone and call all their friends and the people who gave them rides and say, well, did this person really do that 40 miles?
and I think that's the way it is with all the national scenic trails. I mean, I know for the AT, I filled out a piece of paper. No one asked me anything, but I know in my mind that I hiked, continuous footsteps from one end to the other. And, you're probably going to have, who knows, one
absolutely.
yeah.
But,
I mean,
but that's their problem. And all of the people who are purists can sit around the campfire and argue about whether this person's hike counts or that person's hike doesn't count, or
exactly. And there's better campfire talk than that. So,
right.
Well, listen, Joan, this has been, simply amazing. First of all, thank you for coming on the podcast, taking time, out of your evening, talking to us about the North Country Trail. I have learned more in this hour than any research that I could have done online because you've done it. You're the first woman to do it. Before we get to the reading, what's Joan doing now? What's Joan hiking now?
Well, I am putting together a plan to hike some trails in southern Indiana this spring. I knew there were a few trails in southern Indiana. I knew about the Knobstone Trail, which is about 50 miles. But it turns out there are quite a few trails that are 25 miles or longer. So I'm going to string a few of those together and go out and do a little solo backpacking. So that's my next plan.
Perfect. Well, Joan, I hope you will come back and join us again next year or so after you've done that. I know you're going to be well, if you don't go off in the woods and hide, I hope you'll come back on and join us.
Well,
Um,
unless I have no rich relatives that are going to die, so I guess I have to win the lottery, which I don't play. I think we're going to stay with at least one foot in the everyday world trying to make money. So.
yeah. All right, Joan. Now we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
Okay, so you said I could read whatever I wanted. This is about 5 minutes. Is that okay?
You can read whatever you want, Joan. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, this is a section that I've read quite often to people, and thinking about it today, I thought maybe I should apologize because it's in the Adirondacks where that isn't North Country Trail anymore, but it's a trail experience. So, it's my trail experience.
That's right.
Right. So we were in the high peaks, and the Adirondack Lodge, LOJ, is a big deal place up there. And we were picking up a supply box there. So there was Marie and Matilda and my little dog Chips, who hiked about 1,200 miles of the trail with me before he died.
Mm-mm.
A young boy at the lodge, who heard that we were hiking the mountains, saw the rocky trails from a perspective closer to the ground and recognized the potential difficulty. He asked me, "Will you have to carry the dog?" Chips is a dog bristling with energy, stamina, and wit, who's usually offended at the idea of being carried, although he did accept rides in North Dakota to cross the cattle grates made of piping. Nevertheless, he faces his own challenges on Indian Pass. 40 pounds of muscle and willfulness are enough to keep him ahead of us, even when he has to find longer routes over the rocks. He has 4 legs, to be sure, but they are shorter than ours. I'm wishing my own were longer as I try for the dozenth time to locate a foothold that isn't somewhere above waist level. Sort of beside and above me, I hear a thump slash, the sound of Chip's pack filled with water bottles hitting bare rock. A glance left freezes one cartoon frame of a small blonde dog with a red and blue pack, spread-eagled against vertical gray granite. Claws extended like a cat, he tries to grip the surface, but slides as surely as gravity is functional to an inglorious heap at the base of the rock. Not to worry, even with recovery time for his pride, he still beats us to the top of the pass. For the trip down, we have a dog contingency plan. The guidebook has forewarned us that there are 2 ladders affixed to the rocks in places where there are vertical drops in the trail. Chips is willing to climb ladders which have flat steps and a bit of incline, but we don't know exactly what configuration of rungs and angles we will find here. So as part of the preparation for this trip, I have taught Chips to ride in my backpack. In a pinch, I could climb down, empty my pack, return to the top of the rock, and ferry the dog down. The training for this shenanigan has a much higher entertainment value than the final result. 2 days of the recommended maximum training time, 15 minutes, were wasted trying to get the pup to back into the empty pack. This activity was beneath his dignity, but when I asked him to crawl in head first, he readily agreed. The obvious thing to do next was turn around and stick his head out, and being a sensible pooch, he promptly did just that. After that, I simply had to pick up the pack, put it on, and carry the dog. The only real difference between 40 pounds of gear and 40 pounds of dog is that the dog packs less firmly. Over the next few weeks, Chips and I worked out the kinks in this operation. He determined where to brace his hind feet, and I only suffered a couple of dozen kidney punches during this learning process. Initially, he had had enough of this activity after 2 minutes, but I gave him a stern warning that he would not be able to go on this hike if he didn't agree to stay in the pack longer. To Chips, such a possibility was about the same as threatening to murder him, and he quickly acquiesced. After much wiggling, he found the optimal position for riding, his hind feet pressed against my back and his front paws balanced on my shoulders. Whispering sweet nothings in my ears and occasionally licking them, he rode, and I marched around the house and yard for 5 or 10 minutes each day. Any concerns I harbored about how he would perceive the addition of a vertical dimension were unnecessary. We added stair climbing, step ladder mounting, and finally going up and down our narrow spiral staircase. Chips the Wonder Dog was ready for the hike. After lunch, we reached our first view of Henderson Lake and the first ladder at the same location. We can hardly comprehend that when we reach that lake, the hike will be over. Not only does it seem impossible that it is the last day, but it looks mighty far away. The ladder drops almost vertically, 15 feet off a block of stone with no other feasible route of descent. It looks like the pooch packing plan is going to be needed. For a few seconds, getting Marie to go down the ladder seems like it might be more difficult than Chips. But after some customary whimpering about why she lets me get her into these things, down she goes. Chips takes one look over the edge and, with no whimpering or hesitation, walks headfirst down the ladder. He gets about 8 feet down, now closer to the bottom than the top, before realizing what he has just done. The magnitude of his accomplishment stalls him on the spot. He tries turning around, but that's not going to be an option even for my agile dog. He contemplates jumping, and Marie is now below him, trying to second guess his next decision. With some world-class coaxing from her, Chips decides to walk the rest of the way down the ladder. What a pup. And what a friend, my ladder-dreading, dog-enduring pal.
Wow. Simply amazing, Joan. Thank you so much for reading that. And I really, really, really appreciate you being on the podcast.
Thank you.
I cannot thank you enough, Joan, for joining us on the podcast. It is truly an honor to have the first woman to complete the North Country Trail by hiking end to end on this show, talking to us about your journey. Your passion for the North Country Trail shined through as you told us about being interviewed in a ditch, committing to completing the entire trail, and reading us your story about Chips the Wonder Dog. I could literally see Chips going down that ladder as you were reading. I hope this is not our last conversation and look forward to talking again real soon. Thanks for listening, everybody, and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A. member FDIC.